In what has become one of the most dramatic developments in recent royal history, the British royal family has formally severed ties with one of its own members. The announcement sent shockwaves through the public, raising countless questions about what happens next, particularly concerning a substantial fortune worth £3.7 million. The palace confirmed they had initiated a formal process to strip away titles that had been held for decades. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture or a temporary measure. This represented a complete and fundamental separation from the royal front line, fundamentally altering privileges, responsibilities, and public standing in ways that haven't been seen in modern times. For someone who was once a working member of the royal family, attending state functions, and representing the crown at official events, this dramatic fall from grace has left many wondering about the financial implications. After all, being part of the royal establishment comes with certain financial arrangements, allowances, and access to resources that most people could only dream of. Before these recent events unfolded, the net worth was estimated at around £3.7 million, which translates to approximately $5 million. Now, while this might sound like an enormous sum to the average person, by royal standards, this is actually quite modest. For comparison, other members of the family have wealth estimated in the tens or even hundreds of millions. Over the decades of royal service, there had been substantial funding received for carrying out royal duties. Reports suggest this amounted to nearly £13 million over the years. This funding covered everything from staff salaries to travel expenses, security costs, and the general expenses that come with representing the monarchy at home and abroad. One of the most significant assets in this portfolio has been the long-term lease on a property at Windsor Great Park. This isn't just any property. We're talking about a sprawling residence that has been home for many years, and the terms of this lease were remarkably favorable, to say the least. The arrangement involved paying £1 million up front for the lease itself. Then, there was a massive investment of £7.5 million in refurbishments. These weren't minor cosmetic updates. This was a complete transformation of the property, bringing it up to a standard befitting royal residence. Here's where it gets really interesting. Once those renovations were completed, the annual rent essentially disappeared. The lease was structured over 75 years, and when you break down the initial costs over that period, it works out to roughly £113,000 per year. This is far, far below what the property would command on the open market. In fact, market estimates suggest the true rental value would be several times higher. But there's an even more remarkable detail. Since 2003, the actual annual rent paid has been what's legally termed a peppercorn rent. This means paying just one peppercorn per year, if demanded. Yes, you heard that right. A literal peppercorn. This is a legal mechanism used to create a binding lease while essentially charging nothing. It's symbolic rather than financial, keeping everything legally proper while being so nominal that it's practically non-existent. Under the original terms, there was entitlement to remain in this expansive property until 2078. That's over 5 decades of secure, luxurious accommodation with virtually no ongoing rental costs. Property experts had said that removing someone from such an arrangement would be incredibly difficult. The lease agreement was legally binding, and without breach of contract or mutual consent, eviction would be nearly impossible. However, everything changed with the recent palace announcement. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease. This means the decades-long arrangement is coming to an end. The statement was clear. While the lease had provided legal protection to continue in residence up until now, that protection is being withdrawn. The move to alternative private accommodation is now underway. This brings us to the crucial question: what happens to the fortune now? The financial position appears to be entering a period of significant uncertainty, and there are several factors at play. First and foremost, there will no longer be private allowances and institutional backing. This support was reportedly worth around £1 million per year. That's a substantial amount of money, and it covered many of the costs associated with maintaining a certain lifestyle and level of security. Without this annual support, there's now the burden of covering significant ongoing expenses from personal resources alone. Security costs for someone in this position can be astronomical. We're talking about professional protection officers, secure transport, communication systems, and all the infrastructure that goes with high-level personal security. These costs can easily run into hundreds of thousands of pounds annually. Then there's the maintenance of any remaining properties, staff salaries for personal assistants, household staff, and advisors, and all the general living expenses that come with maintaining a certain standard of living. All of this must now be funded privately, without the institutional support that was previously taken for granted. The reputational damage and loss of status have also had concrete financial implications. Access to business networks that once provided opportunities has been severely limited. Several companies that had previous connections have reportedly either paused relationships or severed ties entirely. This means that potential income streams from business ventures, consultancy roles, or board positions have dried up significantly. The financial prospects are now increasingly reliant on less liquid assets, primarily property holdings. While property can be valuable, it doesn't provide immediate cash flow unless it's sold or rented out, and selling major assets often takes time and can result in losses if done under pressure. So where will the existing funds go? Based on the financial pressures outlined, it's highly likely that the current fortune will need to be deployed to cover costs that were previously handled through royal funding. The £1 million in annual allowances that have been lost must now be replaced from personal wealth. Over just a few years, this could significantly deplete the available liquid assets. The situation with the primary residence adds another layer of complexity. Having invested £7.5 million in renovations, walking away from that property represents a substantial sunk cost. While the £1 million lease payment might be recoverable in some form, the renovation investment is largely lost value that cannot be recouped. The move to alternative private accommodation will also come with costs. Even if this accommodation is being privately funded by family members, as has been suggested, there will still be personal expenses involved in relocating, potentially furnishing a new residence, and adjusting to different living arrangements. Looking at the broader picture, the financial model that sustained this lifestyle for decades has fundamentally changed. The combination of institutional support, favorable property arrangements, and access to royal resources created a financial ecosystem that made a relatively modest personal fortune stretch much further than it otherwise would. Without that ecosystem, the same fortune must now work much harder. Security alone could consume a quarter of the annual investment returns from a £3.7 million portfolio. Add in property costs, staff, and living expenses, and it becomes clear that the existing wealth may not be sufficient to maintain the previous standard of living indefinitely. There's also the question of future income generation. With business opportunities limited and no prospect of returning to any form of public role, the options for generating new income are constrained. Traditional employment is obviously not on the table, and many of the consultancy or advisory roles that might once have been available are now closed off. Investment returns from the existing capital become crucial in this scenario. With conservative investment strategies appropriate for someone in this position, a £3.7 million portfolio might generate returns of somewhere between £150,000 to £250,000 annually. This is substantial income for most people, but when you're covering security costs that could run to similar amounts, plus all other expenses, the mathematics become challenging. There's also the consideration of other family members affected by these changes. While daughters will continue to hold their titles and positions remain unchanged in the line of succession, the former wife has also lost her courtesy title and will need to make her own living arrangements. This dispersal of the previously consolidated household will create additional financial pressures and duplicated costs. The future accommodation at a family estate in Norfolk represents a partial solution to the housing question, with funding being provided privately by other family members. This demonstrates that while the institutional separation is complete, family support hasn't been entirely withdrawn. However, this arrangement also creates a dependency that's quite different from the previous independent if institutionally supported position. What's particularly striking about this entire situation is how it illustrates the difference between wealth and access to resources. A net worth of £3.7 million is objectively substantial. It places someone firmly in the wealthy category by any normal standard. However, when that wealth must replace an entire support structure that was previously provided institutionally, and when it must do so while maintaining security and standards appropriate to someone who was, until very recently, a senior royal, the picture looks quite different. The coming years will be crucial in determining whether the existing fortune is sufficient to maintain a comfortable lifestyle without institutional support. Much will depend on how expenses are managed, whether any new income sources can be developed, and how the less liquid assets like property holdings are leveraged or potentially sold to generate cash flow. What's certain is that life has changed dramatically and permanently. The combination of lost allowances, forced property changes, damaged business relationships, and ongoing high costs creates a financial picture that's far more constrained than what existed just months ago. The £3.7 million fortune, while substantial, will need to be carefully managed to ensure long-term financial security without the royal safety net that once existed. This situation serves as a reminder that wealth, status, and financial security are not the same thing. The institutional framework of the royal family provided financial benefits that went far beyond direct monetary support, and losing that framework has implications that extend well into the future. The fortune that once seemed more than adequate may now need to work harder than ever before, covering costs and maintaining standards that were previously supported by one of the world's oldest and most established institutions.